Yo, what's going on, guys? Jin here, and today is Axe Day. Leg day, arm day, glute day, leg day again. No barbarian routine is complete without Axe Day. So this is an endgame Axe Whirlwind build for farming Nightmare Dungeons. Let's get into it. So we're going to start with the skill tree. It's the usual for Whirlwind besides some passive changes. I've got Lunging Strike, Combat Lunging Strike. I've got Whirlwind with Furious Whirlwind for the bleeds. Maxed out Pressure Point for a source of vulnerability besides the Exploit Glyph. It's mostly to help with the dungeon bosses and extra annoying elites. Then we have one in each of the shouts. We've got Rallying Cry with Tactical Rallying Cry, Challenging Shout with Tactical Challenging Shout, and Warcry with Power Warcry. And we want all three of the shout buffs maxed out. Swiftness, 3 in there to go fast. Then we got the 3 in Pit Fighter, 2 in Slaying Strike, 1 in Hamstring, that's very important. You'll want your bleeding effects to apply slow. That synergizes really well with Furious Whirlwind, of course. Then we've got 3 in Cuts to the Bone for the extra bleed damage against Vulnerable. This build does a lot of bleed damage, so we want to capitalize on that. Then we have Thick Skin, 1 in there. And 3 in Counter Offensive will be fortified a lot, so that's 12% more damage there. 3 in Heavy Handed, 1 in Tempered Fury, 3 in Invigorating Fury, 1 in each of the Wraths, all 3 there. And then for the key passive, we've got Unbridled Rage, which is the standard for Whirlwind. Next up, I'll go through the gear. For the helm, we'll use Harlequin Crest, maybe one day. But until that day, you would want something with these affixes. Basically, cooldown reduction is a necessity, but also total armor and max health are nothing to sneeze at. Total armor basically adds another item's worth of armor, which is a huge chunk of percentage to physical damage reduction. And armor gives about half of that to non-physical damage reduction as well. And for the aspect on the helm, I've got Numbing Wrath for the extra fortify. For the chest piece, we're going to go with the Rage of Harrogath. It's got great stats, excellent unique modifier to help with the shout up time, and it also has thorns. Yay! So if you don't have one of these and you're finding yourself in a bunch of sticky situations, aka dying a lot, then you would probably want to use something tanky like this one here, which is basically prioritizing damage reduction, armor, and max life. And you would put the Grasping Whirlwind on this. Next up for the gloves. This is basically where some of the magic happens, so we're not going to be using gauze, although you can time gauze out to explode at the end of the vulnerability windows for that big damage. When you're farming and flying through these nightmare dungeons, it can really mess up the flow, and you're basically not going to need that damage from gauze anyway. So instead, we're going to be using something like this here. So we've got the 4 ranks on Whirlwind, which is basically mandatory. So you want to find one with 3 and that'll upgrade to 4. And then I've got it loaded on the back end with crit strike chance and damage to injured. The reason for this is because almost everything we hit gets into injured range almost immediately with the exploit glyph's guaranteed vulnerable proc. And at this point it's almost like having an execute. So Lucky Hit would be great as well with proccing Pressure Point in place of the crit chance to injured, but I just don't have gloves with that right now, so I'm using this. As for the aspect, if you're using Rage of Harrogath, you could put the Grasping Whirlwind on here. If not, you could use something like Berserk Ripping or the Expectant, since if you're not using Rage of Harrogath, you'll have Grasping Whirlwind on the chest piece. So next up, we've got the pants. We are using these tanky Bard pants, loaded with the damage reduction, armor, and health. I've got Iron Blood on here for the extra damage reduction versus bleeding, because everything we directly damage bleeds. Next up we have the boots. For the innate bonus I have the evade charges, but evade gives move speed is awesome as well. There are basically a few key affixes you want on the boots, the main two being movement speed and fury cost reduction. Outside of that, just go for more movement speed after killing elites, stats, damage reduction when injured, or berserker duration. As for the aspect, you would want Ghost Walkers, as you can see here, And if you don't have Ghost Walkers, Wind Strikers are pretty fine as well. Here are some Wind Strikers, so you can have a look there. Next up, we have the Amulet. So for the Amulet, you want to get CDR and Fury cost reduction as the main two stats. Affixes, rather. Outside of that, there's Strength, Damage reduction, Armor, Move Speed. All of those are decent. Here I've got the 3 to defensive skills, but it's not really needed. And as for the aspect, I've got Disobedience, which gives me 0.75% increased armor for 4 seconds when I deal any form of damage, stacking up to 75%. So basically every tick of damage you do with Whirlwind plus bleeds will all stack to this, which is absolutely insane, as you can reduce physical damage taken from enemies up to 100% with this. Absolutely busted. So next up we have the rings. We've just got the typical stuff here. You want to get critical strike chance, resource generation, critical strike damage, and vulnerable damage. As for the aspects, you want to have Echoing Fury for your shouts to generate fury per second while active, and that is per shout, so if you have 2 shouts active. So with 2 shouts active, you will get 6 fury per second here with my ring. And for the other aspect, you want to have the Bold Chieftain's aspect, which is whenever you cast a shout, its cooldown is reduced by 1.4 seconds per nearby enemy up to 6. So basically that's almost always going to give you 6-second cooldown on every shout skill, which is super good. So next up we're going to go through the weapons. And like the rings, there's not a lot of diversity in the affixes. We want to have vulnerable damage, crit damage, core damage, and strength. If we can't get any of those, the next best would be close damage, damage to slowed or CC'd. So let's talk about the aspects here. For the two-handed mace, as you can see, I've got Dire Whirlwind. You'll get bigger damage numbers with Edgemasters on the two-hander, but Dire Whirlwind is just... it feels much more consistent, since your crit chance will be at about 80% after the first second of Whirlwinding, with Expertise, Mortal Draw, and Exploit proccing Vulnerable, which gets a lot more crits off in those windows, especially for dungeon bosses. So for the one-handers, I've got Berserk Ripping and Edgemasters, basically for more bleed damage while berserking, and increased damage for my skills based on my fury when cast. Now for the main event, the two-handed axe. So, you may be wondering, why in the HE double hockey sticks am I using an axe? Don't swords give innate crit damage? Wrong. Well, actually you're right, they do. But the axe gives damage against healthy, and all monsters in Diablo 4 start off healthy. So the bonus damage you get from the axe to healthy sends them flying into the injured zone, and that's basically right where we want them. Well, we want them dead, but they'll be closer to dead when they're injured. On top of that, for some reason Whirlwind uses 35% of your base damage when you've got a two-handed axe on, but if you use a two-handed sword, that damage modifier goes to 31%. As you can see here, rapidly attack surrounding enemies for 35% damage, but if I change over to a two-handed sword, it's only 31% damage. So I'm not really sure why that is, but axes make you look cooler. The game even says so. As for the aspect, I've got Limitless Rage on my axe for Limitless Raging, and with our low max fury, it's easy to hit that max, which also benefits Edgemasters. So you'll be axing those demons many questions in no time at all. For the gems, in the weapons you'll be going green, doing your part for the world for that extra crit damage. For the armor, you'll be using sapphires, the blue gems, for damage reduction whilst fortified. And for the jewellery, you'll be using the skulls of the demons we've been slaying with our axe. For the bonus armor. So last but not least, we're going to tackle the Paragon board. The big confusing thing that takes all of everyone's gold if the occultist hasn't sucked you dry first. So let's get into this. For the first board, we're going to go with Wrath for that critical strike damage. Here we go. Board 2, we've got the Decimator board, which we're going to put Martial in there, the Martial glyph for that extra vulnerable damage synergy here with the board. And also helps with the shout cooldowns. Right of that, we've got the third board, which is going to be the... What board is this? The Weapons Master? The Weapons Master board. I always forget that one. And we're going to put Miss Cleaver in here. So the Cleaver glyph works really well. As you can see, while wielding an axe, you deal 12% increased critical strike damage, and also that insane bonus damage with axes. So we've loaded this with strength just to get the most out of that. And for the fourth board, which is going to be on the left, we have the Blood Rage board, and I've got the Undaunted glyph in here. You could also go with Imbiber or Disembowel for that one, but I just prefer the way Undaunted feels. And then for the fifth board, all the way up here, we have the Flawless Technique board, and we're going to put the Mortal Draw in here. I really love this glyph and how it functions. So just make sure before you Whirlwind you activate it by using Lunging Strike. Make sure that Lunging Strike is set to either your dual wield or your two-handed bludgeoning, so that when you do Whirlwind with the axe, you'll get that bonus 18% critical strike chance, which also works very well with Exploit, of course. And you get the 89.3% damage with that skill that you swap to. And then for the last board, the sixth board here, we have the Warbinger board, not the Warbringer board. And we've got the Exploit glyph in here, of course, with its insane effect and vulnerable damage. So basically, we just want to load this up with as much dex as possible here. So that basically wraps up my guide to The Shining. I've linked the full build in the description below, so if you try the build out, let me know how it went. If you have any suggestions or tips for playing the build, comment down below. And if you enjoyed the guide, consider liking and subscribing, and hitting the bell, etc. It helps a lot. I will now leave you with some classic axe whirlwinding footage. Bye!